everyone for joining. This is the Opportunities and Barriers for BIPOC Entrepreneurs at the Growth Stage of Business session. And this is our third and final panel. So a huge thank you to Anna Ackerman, Program Manager at CEI Women's Business Center, and Tom Kittredge of Maine Technology Institute. He's also a Startup Maine board member. They have made all of these possible. So we've been the team behind this three-part series. And Startup Maine and CEI's Women's Business Center have really enjoyed partnering together on this project. On that note, if you do have any ideas for programming or events, send them my way. We always like to hear what would be helpful to people in the ecosystem. So you can email me your ideas at katie@startupmaine.org. So I'd be remiss not to mention our sponsors. It is made possible by Bangor Savings Bank, Maine Technology Institute, and Maine Angels. A quick word about these organizations. Maine Technology Institute was founded and funded in 1999 by the Maine State Legislature, and they offer grants, loans, equity investments, and services to support Maine's innovation economy. They support new ideas, products, or methods with the potential to grow and diversify Maine's economy and increase the number of jobs. MTI also supports Maine's innovation economy through event sponsorships that promote innovation and entrepreneurship like this series. So we thank them. To learn more and to find out if you're eligible for funding, visit mainetechnology.org. And we are also supported by Maine Angels. The Maine Angels are accredited equity investors who help entrepreneurs by investing in and mentoring early stage companies. Their goal is to make sound investments in promising New England entrepreneurs with an emphasis on scalable Maine companies. And lastly, a huge thanks to Bangor Savings Bank. I have a brief video I want to show you from them.
All across New England, business owners are finding new ways to succeed. Families are working hard to provide for their loved ones and their future. It's the spirit of New Englanders that inspires all of us to do more. It's in our employees, our customers, and our communities. Every day we do more. Because at Bangor Savings Bank, we truly believe you matter more.
Love it. Love their music. All right, so on with the show. Today's event is moderated by Matthew Lewis. Matt is the Portfolio and Business Services Manager at MaineStream Finance. He has over 10 years of experience owning, managing, and nurturing small businesses. His work includes providing technical assistance to small businesses and loan services to MaineStream Finance's commercial and residential customers. In 2007, Matt returned to Maine to work for the Passamaquoddy tribe of Washington County and developing lending strategies, commercial scale renewable energy projects, and intergovernmental database methodologies. He served on the board of directors for the Passamaquoddy tribe's commercial scale maple syrup operation. So Matt, I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce today's panelists, and we'll let you take it from here. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll remove my video. So pass it off to you, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Yes, I'm Matthew Lewis. I'm also a Passamaquoddy tribal member, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by two very talented and successful BIPOC entrepreneurs who've grown their businesses and are here today to share their stories and share their insights and experience about some of the barriers and opportunities for BIPOC entrepreneurs. Kerem Durdag, President and COO of GWI Inc. and founder of Indus Fund, a community-supported microloan fund for the immigrant community. Joining us as well is Cara Stadler, renowned chef at 88 Hospitality, operating Tao Yan in Brunswick and Bao Bao Dumpling House in Portland, as well as starting Canopy Farms. So we'll get right into it. Kerem, give us a little bit about your background, and from your perspective, what does it mean to be an immigrant entrepreneur?
From a background, I would urge people just to Google me, because there's a fair amount there. But the very, very quick version is I was fortunate enough to run a bunch of companies, fortunate enough with my business partner, had a startup that we were able to grow and sell. And then since then, been fortunate enough to join a bunch of other companies that I've run. And one unfortunate that I failed at, which was a good learning experience for me personally. And you can read all about that, because I think in failure lies some success. In terms of the immigrant entrepreneur, for me, And so I'm Turkish. I grew up in Pakistan. I'm Turkish and Pakistani. I came to the US when I was 17 and a half. And I came to New England when I was 21 and to Maine in my late 20s. Because, as I say in my way, I gave up 3 continents for love, which is actually true. But my wife usually now says, enough is enough. It's been really a very long time. So, but, I think the immigrant entrepreneur, for me, is somebody who is self-actualizing in a creative way to make a life for themselves in this country. And the reason why we self-actualize is because, as with all human beings, we have a certain drive to manifestly articulate who we are, what we are about. And in the immigrant community, that is a function also of displacement. You're coming from one area to another area and essentially rebirthing yourself. You are rerouting yourself. You are recreating yourself. And in that, one mechanism that is fairly dominant is creating your own businesses. In my case, I think it was all wrapped up. And also I have a fairly deep technical background and a business background. So I said, I want to be able to participate in the economic development activities of the state of Maine. And at that time, with my business partner, Jeff Andel, we sort of surreptitiously met and magical things happened. So there's some level of intentionality that I think the immigrant business entrepreneur carries. There's a certain leaning into it of, I'm going to do this no matter what, because I want to create, I want to have something for my kids, and I want to participate. It's a very participatory activity to create something on the sort of the entrepreneurship level. And especially if it's something that has a terminal connection to, making sure that you have food on the table. So in those triangulated ways, we sort of say, here I am gifting myself to the world as much as the world is gifting things to me. And that velocity then takes place. So that is my background and why I decided, without even deciding, that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and a businessman.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Cara, for you, give us a little bit about your entrepreneurial story and tell us how you got to run 2 restaurants and a farm.
I have a very different story. My mom is the first generation born Chinese, and her parents came from Shanghai. So I'm second generation, and I'm half white and half Chinese. And so I would say, like, from the BIPOC story, the entrepreneur side comes from, I think, a family thing of my dad, because my dad's an entrepreneur, and also, but in the same sense, sharing culture through what I do is definitely a huge part of it, and bringing that and that perspective is a huge part of the reason why I ended up in it. Also, as we'll get into, part of the reason I ended up being an entrepreneur was because, being someone who is a woman who's queer and of color, we don't fit the norm for the people who are in charge, and being able to do something without someone else dictating how I should behave or act when they don't really understand all of their perspectives is sort of why I ended up wanting to do my own business, and the freedom of not having someone else's perspective override my voice. I guess is the way to say it. So,
have you accessed any resources in Maine to help you start your businesses?
Maine is, yeah, I mean, we've definitely accessed some community groups. We've used a lot. The city of Portland has a lot of grants that they give access to people to for help funding and getting started up. And we've used those, but I mostly have stayed, we've done everything ourselves. It's me and my mom. And so we started our business ourselves, and we sort of been self-invested, and we're the only owners, and we didn't want to branch out. Again, part of the reason why is because there's a lack of diversity at the top. And a lack of representation at the top, which is something that's harder to work with when you know you might be getting passed over because of those reasons.
So let's get into that a little bit more. Let's talk about these problems that exist. Kerem, as someone who, in a great article, I encourage people to look up, Maine Startup Insider. You're doing a 3-part series on just this very topic of this problem. So could you discuss that, on what that means to have that lack of representation at the top?
Sure. So there's, there are multiple levels, multiple axes, but fundamentally there's a bunch of stuff that's simply absent in the ecosystem. And so I am a statistical outlier by and large as member of the immigrant community, where I had a startup or a bunch of startups, and I successfully navigated the trials and tribulations, especially in Maine, and was successful. I should not be that. I should not be the statistical outlier. And I think there's a couple of things that we should dive into. One is, at the current time, there is a significant absence of immigrant representation on board of directors. Not just board of directors of companies, but board of directors of those institutions and entities that actually make decisions and provide investments and provide grants, provide various mechanisms for startups and entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. It's not that they don't want to be involved, but they don't know how to be involved because there's no representation, there's no perspective bringing that comes in for them to know how to reach out, how to do the outreach, how to be physically present, how to win the trust and validation of the immigrant community. And so, insofar as my responsibility goes, I feel I'm responsible to be able to bridge over and bring that perspective, and commensurate it is the responsibility of those entities to reach out and say, okay, can we get together? So that board representation is immensely important, because the state of Maine is 1.3 million people. Everybody knows everybody. It's not the 6 degrees of separation, is maybe a half a degree of separation. So that leads to the second challenge, which is, if the immigrant business community is not part and parcel of the network, they are marginalized out of that network. And when they're marginalized out of that network, they're not part of the decision-making process. And so that sort of feeds into itself, where the business entrepreneur then feels they don't understand me, they don't get me, and I don't want to be with that ecosystem. The unfortunate tragedy is that the ecosystem is actually healthy. There are mechanisms. There are ways. Over the last 20 to 25 years, Maine has done a fairly decent and wonderful job of creating this environment. But the environment has been very focused on a homogeneous population. It has not busted through. And so my suggestion is that if Maine needs to overcome its demographic challenges, its age challenges, it needs to be able to become more inclusive. And that's also cultural, right? So how many times have we heard of, you're not from here, or you will never be a Mainer? Now we sort of ha he tuss this, but the problem is that ends up being a fairly high psychological barrier for an immigrant to try to overcome, together with everything else they have to deal with. We work 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. We have things going on, and in order to then deal with an underlying sort of this psychological hurdle is huge, right? So you become ostracized, you become the other. And when you become the other, it's awfully, awfully, awfully hard then to be able to sort of lean in and say, I'm available here to be part of this community, right? So that's a challenge. There are also challenges in terms of just mechanics. You know, one assumes that everybody should be able to read through pages and pages of application material. Well, I can, because I'm really, really fortunate that I went to a school that taught me English. But so by the time I got here, you know, my command of the English language was, well, you know, decent. But that's not true for everybody. So these mechanisms of dispersing information, can they be translated? Can they be simplified? Why do we assume that immigrant entrepreneurs should be able to, you know, ingest information automatically? That's not true. They're not aware of the way to how to access these architectures, right? If there's a Maine Technology Institute, there's a Maine Venture Fund, there's a CEI, all great institutions. But the immigrant business entrepreneur doesn't know either they exist, or if they know they exist, they're overwhelmed by it because there's so many input points. I know who to call, I know who to talk to, but that's not necessarily true for the immigrant entrepreneur, right? So we create these hurdles. The other thing is, we have a fairly widespread mentorship network that exists in the state of Maine, right? But that mentorship network is comfortable dealing and mentoring with one set of homogeneous population. Let's expand that. And there are institutions that have done that. SCORE, for example, has been very intentional about it. And that's the key word, intention. Intention is what makes things happen. So if you want board representation, you have to be intentional about it. If you want to disperse funds and investments, you have to be intentional about it. So for example, I'm a member of the Maine Angels. My brothers and sisters in the Maine Angels have intentionality to say, okay, we want to do certain things in the immigrant community. And that takes lots of conversation, but it has happened. But is that true for all the other institutions? In the state of Maine, there's 230 some plus economic development entities. That's a pretty wide spread. How many of those have the intention of wanting to bridge over and say, I want to be inclusive. I want to include the immigrant entrepreneur community, the immigrant business community, that I understand them, right? How many of these entities have partnered with the likes of the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center, Prosperity Maine, Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition, and say, we would like to have your perspective of how to get into these communities. Just having a website and having a phone number is not enough. You have to sort of be present physically, right, in that community and say, I am here. I have some information for you. And it's not just 1, 2, 3 times, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, because that's what we did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there was no startup community in Maine, but after 600 million plus bucks, lots and lots of meetings, lots of really, really good people saying, I'm intentional about it. Now look around us. Startup is no longer an absent, sort of non-creative vocabulary. It exists now in our vernacular. So that was intention. If we are intentional, the immigrant entrepreneur community will come. We also have to get over this thing about, credentialing. That's really important, right? I know immigrant entrepreneurs and businessmen who have advanced degrees that do not have access, because usually so you have a degree in electrical engineering from, Karachi University in Pakistan. Well, that's not applicable over here. Really? Why? Why isn't it applicable? What is the reason that you're not accepting this, right? So is it okay that if you have an advanced degree that you go and change sheets at the local motel or you're a janitor? It's not. So that takes intentionality, right? It takes the ability for us to say, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that everybody's part and parcel of the economic development infrastructure. So those are some, how should I say, dive-ins and actual materials, but here's an example, really, really good example. If an immigrant business entrepreneur in the past went to get a bank loan, they were immediately rejected or given crazy high interest rates. Why? Because they don't have credit. They don't have collateral. So from a bank's point of view, that's an enormous risk, enormous. And so per their process, they go, well, here are the things you have to do in order to qualify. The problem is that's a zero-sum game. But the banking institution has a massive lever on it, massive fulcrum to be able to do good. It's not that they don't want to, it's because they don't have the tools that have been given to them to say, here's how you can de-risk it. So people like me, nuts as we say, let's work with the banks to de-risk it a little bit and then widen the net. And now some good things then start to happen because everybody wants to help. That's the one thing in Maine. People want to help. With all the challenges, they want to help. The question is, can we as an entire society come together and enable the tools? We don't want to reinvent the wheel because that is too costly, takes too long, and is enormously hard. So the question is, how do you evolve the structures in place, right? How do you tweak it enough? And, it takes leadership. So, I mean, like people like Cara, myself, we're one of many, right? But it really takes a decision from the top to the come and say, this is a focus for us, a focal point. The current administration has done that, but it was a fairly large wasteland for the last 20 years. Let's be perfectly honest. So when it's a wasteland, it takes a while to sort of sow the seeds and to be able to sort of fertilize the crops. So at least that gives you a sense for the dynamics of things.
That's great. Thank you. Cara, in that regard, what do you think? What can companies and organizations do to have more of a diversity and inclusion lens?
What companies do?
Companies, organizations, what can they do to have a more diversity and inclusion lens?
What can they do? I mean, I think it just comes down to being it's at the top. It's that companies create, if there's a board on the company, that board has a person of color, it has females on it, it's diversified. It can't be all white, and it can't kind of sometimes happen and sometimes not happen. It just has to happen. Something has to change at the top for it to, it just does. I personally wouldn't believe in it if it doesn't change at the top. I wouldn't even consider it, because if I'm going to go into that room and I'm just going to see a bunch of white men, I'm just going to walk out. Like, if those are the people making all the decisions, I'm not going to believe in that system. And that has to change.
Excellent. So the other thing, Kerem, that you mentioned was this access to resources, access to information. Not having the website and the telephone number is not enough. What are ways that organizations can do more? You said the visiting the communities and talking with folks. Is it perhaps helping organizations translate their materials, or what do you think as far as giving entrepreneurs easier access to these resources rather than what you had gone through of the reading the 20-page application? Like what can be done?
I think you hit the nail on the head, which is to be physically present. The immigrant entrepreneur community, the business community, is very relationship based. Those are the cultures that we come from. Not unlike Maine. People like to deal with people that they know, right? So in order for that relationship to be built, you need to be physically present. Now, the good news is the zombie apocalypse is going to be over at some point. So I think getting those things, I think, are going to be much more amenable. But in my mind, it has to be, can we have a meeting in the community? The immigrant community usually has 1 to 2 jobs. It's not like they can at noon, go somewhere. They can't. So you have to go to them. But go at a time when it's in a community, right? Maybe it's at the rec center. Maybe it's at the local church or the local mosque or where they congregate, right? Make yourself be present. If we are good at going to baked bean suppers, town council meetings, well, that means there is some history of reaching out and actually going to the places where people congregate and have a conversation. Well, let's go where they're having a conversation, right? So can we do that multiple times, right? So and can we give them handouts with information? Is there some person that they can have that relationship with? Americans are very comfortable having a relationship with an institution because that is a comfort zone for us in terms of knowing what to do and how to do. For the American business person and the entrepreneur, it is a person. It is another human being because a business transaction is not a transaction. It's a personal relationship. It really, really, truly is. I'm not saying one is better than the other or one is worse than the other. I'm not making any equivalencies. But for the immigrant, it is really important to have this other person sit across you and you know them as much as they're going to know you. Awfully tough to do if you're behind a website or if you're 3 layers deep on a phone tree, or if you're somewhere else and asked to meet up with them. Because those things, unfortunately, create a logistics hurdle that people may not even be aware of. So that's one thing, right? The second thing is this is a long-term play. This is a generational play, right? So we need to be able to inculcate these reach outs way from high school. Think of it. The Portland education system has 60 plus languages in it. 60 plus languages, right? How many of those kids, by the time they go from high school and they enter college, do they know of the certain things that are available to all college students in the state of Maine when it comes to startups and entrepreneurs? Not that much. Now, why? Why is it that they're not aware of it, right? So this Foster Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the U Maine, or the Focus Maine, things for internships, right? Why don't they know about it? It's because nobody's told them. Really, nobody has told them. Nobody has said, hey, you know what? The 10 of you guys here would speak 20 languages. Here's some handouts in 5 different languages, but I am going to tell you that you need to do this, right? And then things happen because it's a generational play. So it's a great question you've asked, and the fundamental answer is be present. Don't assume. Do not assume. The immigrant business, the immigrants of even in the state, even in Portland, they don't have access to decent internet. How are they supposed to get on this website and punt through six different menus? How? Right? So simple stuff like that, but it really has long-term multiplicative impacts. I cannot tell you how important it is for teachers in high school to do this, or teachers even in colleges to do this, which is to say, we believe in you, you are included, and here are the tools and techniques that exist in the state that you need to take advantage of. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in environments where that statement has not been made. And it's very destructive. because it feeds, it just recycles that toxicity, right?
Right.
So.
No, great insight. Cara, as someone who's operating their business as a restaurateur, you have very limited time to access these programs or understand them, or kind of like what Kerem was saying, you know, going through the pages of applications. What would you like to see from resource providers, institutions that could help you access those things? And entrepreneurs are just straight busy. They're you know, just in regular circumstances outside of the BIPOC, entrepreneurs are busy people. They have a very small amount of time. What would be helpful for the BIPOC entrepreneurs that also have to balance the day-to-day operations and trying to access these resources?
Oh, I mean, I think this is a tough one. I think the reality is, like, even with the PPP, it was like as an example of a lack of information. The PPP was insane, and there was very little information at the beginning. And I met a lot of other chefs who didn't even, there's like, we don't have time, we don't know what's going on, the whole industry is getting flipped on its head, and this is the last thing that we're going to deal with. But in my mind, like, that was a huge loss for a lot of businesses, and so many, I mean, like, you can read about how many people of color just missed out on it flat out. And it was a huge resource for my business. Like, we would not be here today without that money, without like, there's no question about it. And that ability I just don't think, I met so many other chefs and owners who just didn't, who I sat down with and was like, you need to sit down and go onto this website and just go here because it will save you this much money. And I think for a lot of owners, there's just a disconnect on even what's worth sitting down for and where's my return there's just no way to measure what the return is going to be for a lot of us. Like, we don't know when we need to spend that 10 minutes to get the $100,000 that we really need, and whether it's even going to pan out, and whether we should believe it. And that, I think that's something, honing in on getting that sort of triage information, what's important for us to look at that's going to save us a lot of money and time. It's hard for people to whittle down that information. And I don't know who's, like, there's no one there. There was no one there being like, you need to sit down and get PPP money, because if you don't, you're losing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of the business. Yeah, and I think there's that I wish for a lot of people I know. I did it with some of my friends, and some people just totally blew it off. And that, having some organization just sort of really reaching out to the community, and that's it. It's reaching out to the community who do not have time to look for this stuff, to say, just, this is worth your time, and the value and the return will be there. I think most of us think like, this may or may not pan out. So do I need to spend 30 minutes or an hour or two online when I already have so many other things that are more important, including some people who have kids and are like, well, do I kill that time to possibly result in something, or do I spend it with my kids so they're in a good mood tomorrow? Like, shouldn't be a question, and that's hard. I guess I'm just knowing more of the financial return of where to spend your time to save yourself a lot of, and then health insurance is one of the sort of same things. And as an entrepreneur, as someone who, like, diving into the bigger, how do you deal with these from the business side of things? How do you give benefits to your staff? How do you organize that? Especially from the restaurant side of things, we don't have a business background. We have we know how to cook. Like, you become a chef, and a lot of entrepreneurs in our industry just open restaurants because they know how to make delicious food, and they know they can make money by making delicious food. But then after that, everything is just brand new and difficult and hard. And the triage that you have to do to figure out what's worth your time and what's not, and how do you make your business better, is really, it's just, from people who don't have a business perspective, a very hard thing to navigate. And I've been very fortunate to have access, both family and friends, to that community. But I think otherwise, I just feel like people are really lost and very afraid to sort of talk, to have this, even start the conversation. Someone else has to reach out and start that conversation with them, because they're not going to reach out on their own. I think that's really, like, because I have that access, I reached out, but otherwise I don't think I would have. Yeah.
That's well put. So that kind of brings me to my next question. Kerem, you started Indus Fund, which is a microloan program that provides access to capital for immigrant community members. What was the reasoning behind that? It seems like we've touched on it, but from your perspective, what was the call to arms that got you started?
So the call to arms was when I found out that an immigrant business person was charged 25% interest. That just made my gray matter just pop out of my skull. And that was 6-7 years ago. And I said, well, that is just wrong. So together with some colleagues, I said, well, there are certain things that can move the needle, and I truly believe that the banking world is one of those. I truly believe that it's one of those. Sidebar note, the bank and the United States Postal Service, together with the library, are the three things that every town in the state of Maine, and every community, hamlet, village, exists. Think of that. So there's close to 532 municipalities. In every one of those, there's a USPS and there's a bank. So that's the lever. That's the lever. And I think in terms of scale and lever, that is just they're just in my DNA. I don't know why. Maybe because I got hit on the head when I was playing cricket a long time ago, or field hockey for that matter. Sidebar note. But so I said, we have to be able to work with the banks. How do I do that? And after many conversations, I decided that one way to do that is we will help the bank de-risk. So the fund provides the dollars, the bank provides the process and the underwriting, but at below market rates. So it's 3.5% interest. We provide up to $10,000 in a microloan. Now, why microloan, right? We are providing the first key to the first door, because once you do that, now you have a track record. Now you have the relationship. Now you have the network. And God bless you, after that, you're on your own. You can run like a gazelle if you choose to do so. You can manage your own destiny your own way. But at least you've gotten the chance to put the key in the engine and rev it up and at least go from one point to the other point. And I also want to do it in an open way, right? So right now we work with Seaport Credit Union, but in the investor pool that I have Bangor Savings, right? So there's no ego involved. We'll share the learnings, because the goal is, if we can do this in the state of Maine, and I'm not privy to whether it exists anywhere else in the United States. I haven't found anything like this. But the goal is that every other community or every other state and every other region should be able to template this, right? As long as the data suggests that there are success benchmarks, that it translates to job creation, economic development. This is the only secret sauce to this is three things. One, provide the capital to de-risk. Second, share the data so that everybody learns from the successes and the failures. Third, mentors. Mentors are absolutely key to that trust and verification. So we have a mentor pool that we created that is administered by the DECD, the state of Maine. Why the state of Maine? Because they are interested and available and want to help. So I grabbed onto that invitation, right? So with those mentors, like SCORE is a huge mentor pool, and they're part and parcel of this. They've done some wonderful work. That's a template for all the mentors. That's a template for all who want to get involved. So the Indus Fund, open for business. You can be any kind of business, even a nonprofit, as long as you're a first-generation New Mainer, as long as you have majority control, and as long as you're a going concern. So all those things, it's a very simple application process. One page, right? It's quick, it's easy, and essentially the fund and the banking institution is saying, as long as you have your plan in place, as long as you're a going concern, we believe in you. We'll take a risk on you. Now, there's enough global data to suggest, concrete data to suggest, that microloans in situations like this have a high repayment rate, and it leads to additional loans being given. So if we want the American population to have a car loan, a mortgage, save for their kids, they need to be part and parcel of this entire system. They can't be outside of it, because once you're outside of it, you don't get to lever up. You don't get to be able to, manage those gears. So we're just providing that key. And we're in it for the long term. This is a 10-year fund, not going anywhere. Unless, we get abducted by alien beings, UFOs, but even then it'll survive. So, but that's why it started. I was enormously frustrated because I knew who to call, right? I know bankers. They're my friends, my peers, my colleagues. I'm going, you don't ask 25% from me. Why? Oh, well, we know you. Oh, well, that's not good enough reason, though, right? To exclude somebody else just because you don't know them. You have to get to know them. Get to know them. So That's how it all started.
That's great. No, that's a fantastic resource, and as you mentioned, it's that stepping stone that people need to get access to traditional financing. So that's fantastic. So we've talked a bit about some of the problems and some ways that the greater resources that are available can help the immigrant population. What are some other opportunities that you see? Things that entrepreneurs or BIPOC entrepreneurs can access that could help them with their businesses. Anyone that's aspiring to do that. Cara, what do you think?
I'm sorry, there's just a very loud noise. I just muted for a second. In terms of what to access?
Yeah, what are some of the opportunities what are some opportunities for BIPOC and immigrant entrepreneurs?
I'm not sure I am the right person to answer this question because I don't know. Again, like I am one of these people who's very disconnected to this environment and went away from all these access to all these things because I wasn't sure of them and wasn't aware of them and had I had funding. So part of it is I didn't have to go through these moments. So I think I might not be the right person to ask this question.
Kerem, do you think of any opportunities?
Well,
for
I do. I do. And I want to be able to also answer Cara's challenge, which is very, very real, right? Which is 24 hours in a day goes awfully fast. And that's a very, very real challenge. So one way to do that is a public service announcement. You know, it's amazing what articulation and communication can do. So if we're serious about this, where is the one place, I'm talking one place, that there's information that can be either handed out or accessed? One place. If you go to the DECD website, there's 26 different menus. It's too complicated, right? If I didn't tell Cara about the intricacies of the Maine Technology Institute, she'll never know about it. Never. So that's a problem. So how is that information going to get disseminated? And I think you can do this with public service announcements. Very clearly, very succinctly, and here is the information, right? Here is the information. The second thing is in terms of opportunities, it's a question of cultural intention. We're part of the 21st century economy. There's a global world around us. The BIPOC community is no different than any other community in being able to identify those opportunities. We do. We see it. We say, here's a dream that I want to be able to raise and root up, right? The challenge is not the opportunity. The challenge is how do you feed that with the little fertilizer and the water and to be able to grow that flower. In order to do that, it's a cultural calibration, right? The homogenous culture in the United States believes in individual, gung-ho, adrenaline and testosterone-driven journey towards entrepreneurship. It's toxic. Nobody succeeds by themselves. Nobody's the John Wayne that does this all. That's a myth. What is true is that there are communities that get together to support each other, that say we're in this together, and we're going to make sure that all of us help each other, right? And so how do we do that here? And it's a cultural thing because we are rooted in our natural resource-based economies, and we believe in this individual thrust. It doesn't work in the 21st century. Collaboration and communication and community does. And so for us, we have to shift our gaze and say, okay, in order for our birth rate not to be negative, we have to bring and include the other, because the other is us. In order to do that, maybe we need to then intentionally take part in diversity and inclusion exercises at the board level, at the community level, at the employee level, at the state level, right? How do we lower this, how should I say, fear? It's a big fear, Matt. It's a huge fear of the unknown. In order for us to make sure that we understand that fear, absorb it, synthesize it, and get beyond it, we have to say, we will reject that. Because if we never say that, things are not going to happen. We have to intentionally reject that fear. So the opportunity is, okay, so I want to have a software company. Oh, great. Doesn't matter if I'm BIPOC or white or not. It shouldn't at that point, right? Because it's an opportunity. If there's 4 or 5 of these large companies that are in Maine that are hiring people, why can't the immigrant community be one of those applicant pools? Why? Right? Do they know about it? Do they feel qualified? If not, why? So ask the 7 whys. At least in my experience, it's not a question of the ability to dream. It's the question of that dreamer to feel comfortable that they can share that. Because in the sharing, then you get the community, right? And I think Cara indicated that things are so busy, but they're all trying to make a go of it. The question is, do they feel appreciated? Do they feel validated? Right? Rather than, oh, they'll get through, it'll be fine. Or my favorite thing is, if they can't figure it out, that means they're not born with the desire to do so. Really, that's a bunch of horse poo. Really? I mean, that's a very exclusionary statement. If they're not hungry enough, then they don't deserve it. Whoa, okay. That's a fairly large statement to make and exclude a whole population, a whole BIPOC population. If they're not hungry enough. So those are things that are in everyday conversation. Those need to get lower and lower and lower and lower.
Right. So what piece of advice would you give someone, a BIPOC entrepreneur? What would you want to, if you could give them a piece of advice, what would you do? What would you say?
Lean in, demand, and come up with solutions and share it. Don't be on the back foot. Demand them reaching out. Demand it with the solutions, with the flag in hand, and say, reach out to me. Have the voice. What Cara is indicating, you got to have the voice.
I just think mentorship and
Yeah.
just finding someone to lead you in the right direction is huge too. It really has a huge, just someone to open the door. Yeah.
Yep.
Matt,
And if I may, Kara's, so that was really, really, if I may, if representation is not there at the board or at the decision-making levels, we are not going to want to get involved. That's really important. So it's not just unidirectional, it has to be bi-directional. So one cannot just say, Kerem, you can just sit on the boards. No. There's not enough Caras and Kerems right now. You have to grow that pipeline. In order to grow that pipeline, you have to say you're going to do it. And that pipeline is 18, 19, 20-year-olds right now. Yeah.
I didn't want to cut you off, Cara. Did you have any
No.
other thoughts on that? We kind of talked about that in the prep call a bit about just do it. Like, you don't need to make this whole strategic plan about how are we going to include diversity inclusion. Just do it. Just start, make it happen at the board level.
Yeah,
Right?
it just has to change. It definitely, and it's not. I do not think it's a barrier that cannot, that is something that can be done. It can be done immediately too. And there's not a lot of us, but there's enough of us that we can start the process. And if it has to start.
And Kerem, I'm actually really glad that you brought up the just that notion of this idea that you have to really climb up and drag yourself through the mud to become an entrepreneur and risk it all, risk everything. Because I got called out on that because I had featured some people on my other series that had kind of been saying that. And let's be clear, it was mostly white affluent men who had said this and this and this is how I got to this place. And then I had a female CEO come on, Helkenberg of Streamo, and she was like, look, if you grow up in a situation where you are housing insecure, and then I can also imagine an immigrant refugee who had to leave from one scenario and come here, asking them to to mortgage their house on their idea when they've come from a housing insecure environment, just not appropriate. So I just think that is the idea that you should just be able to, give up everything. That's just an old way of thinking. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Also, those people should have access to investors. It shouldn't have to be their whole, other people have access to investors. It should not be their whole life on the line. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. They've already put their life on the line 3 times over.
So if you don't mind, I will, yes. And you're right, Kerem. And I appreciate you both being very, being very open and honest during these conversations, because I think it's important. So, okay, we have one question here. I came in to help monitor the chat and the Q&A, so Matt didn't have to click all the buttons here. So somebody mentioned, okay, one, yes, we need more mentors from the BIPOC community versus the middle-aged white guy demographic at some of these entrepreneurial support organizations. So step one, if anyone listening in on the call is part of an entrepreneurial support organization, I think this is just a call to action to try to step up who you have as mentors. Okay, so it says here, okay, so you brought up diversifying board leadership. It's clear that in addition to that, boards need to create an inclusive environment that makes BIPOC members even feel welcome and included for the totality of their skills and experience. Do Cara and Kerem have any suggestions for how to create this environment at the board level?
There's some really good institutions that do racial equality training, diversity and inclusion training. Access those, get those. It may cost you a couple of bucks in 3 days, but well worth it. There are institutional ways to do this deeply, other than reading Ibrahim Kendi's book and everybody else's book. But go from the book to actual tools. So get those training tools. They exist. Absolutely exist. Absolutely exist.
Yes, and they're here. We have they're national, but we also have some organizations doing them here. So
absolutely, reach out to them. Yeah, don't be afraid.
Right. No one knows what they're doing, so just ask for help. Okay, so for organizations or resources or service providers with limited capacity for building one-on-one relationships, are there trusted liaisons that can help build bridges into BIPOC communities, and who may they be?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple. There's a Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center. There's Prosperity Maine. There's the Maine Immigrant Human Rights Coalition. If you're on the refugee side, there's the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project. There's about 30 organizations that are very involved in those communities, and you have to be able to partner up and collaborate with them, because they are the access points. They are the trust and validation points. Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to help with that, by the way, offline. Anybody wants to access those, but those institutions exist. That's their job. That's their oxygen. They're part of that community.
So people are posting in the chat here for some of the great resources that we have here. So anyone that's in reviewing the chat, we're dropping them in. Lacey, she just said, can we share the organizations? Yes, we will follow up in an email to everyone who's on or RSVP'd, and in addition to this recording, we will also send a list of organizations. So we will do that for sure.
That's great. Yeah, actually, I don't want to interrupt, but the city of Portland just did a wonderful little program by Julio Trujillo's office, the Office of Equal Opportunity, Angelica and Julia, CEI, and we were involved as part of the selector group, and SCORE and a bunch of others, New Ventures. And that was food-based entrepreneurs and business owners getting trained and getting mentored. And then if they went through that program, they got a grant. And then in order for them to take their business from point A to point B. That's a good template. There are other templates like this. They exist. But the thing that really, really made me happy was it's a crap ton of work to do that. But they did it. The city of Portland did it. It took them, I don't know, the program was like 10 weeks or something. But before that, they probably spent 12 weeks prepping it, right? Translators, materials, getting organized, making the connections. It's an enormous amount of work. But the reciprocative trust that those 10 business owners now have in the state and the city is enormous. It's life-changing. And so it's really soulful to see that kind of a bridge being made, because now that will have its own momentum. That will have its own little percolation, right? They've gone from we were never being heard to now, oh my God, they care. So I'm going to do this. So I think those things are really joyfully present that I think should be congratulated and just multiplied. Instead of one program, there should be 20 of them.
And like you said, there's more things that we all and also that the state can do. So I think this is a great session where we are pointing out some problems that we know exist, but also you're giving a lot of solutions. And I think you're going to be talking more about them in these the things that the series that you're writing. But it's also, there's a potential call to action if someone wants to be solution oriented. So I'm going to type one more answer or type one more thing to respond to somebody's question, but I think we can wrap up unless anyone has, Matt, I don't want to cut you off, Matt, but if you have any other questions, otherwise Cara or Kerem, do you have any closing thoughts? Doesn't need to be anything grand. Just as you've had this conversation or as you've been having conversation with your peers, like just any closing thoughts?
I want to say one thing also, and this is from a public standpoint. I think visually, when media highlights businesses with people of color, it makes a huge impact, a huge one. Almost even like you talking about instant access, like it has a. So when you're like highlighting startup companies, or when you just having that representation is just, it's huge. Making sure that you have that spot, it makes a big difference for people, the media side of things. And I know it's not what drives the banks or anything, but I think from a business owner looking out and like looking to like find other resources or being excited about that has a huge impact as a person of color, like to see other people of color on that stage. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say the future of Maine depends on inclusion. I'll be that bold. If we can't include, we will be irrelevant to the rest of the nation in about 70 to 100 years. It's that dire. The world is changing really fast. We have to change with it no matter how uncomfortable it is. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And as somebody wrote in the chat, we need to stop using the term "from away." I've totally outlawed that term.
Yeah, I'm so done with that. I'm so done after 20 years. I'm so done with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I call people out on it now. I'm like, no, stop that. We're not using that anymore. So Matt and Kerem and Cara, I thank you so much for taking the time. We all met before and had a prep call. We wanted this to be useful to our audience and just really have a discussion. This is obviously I know that everyone thinks about this a lot more these days. And I'm really glad that we could just be part of bringing your voices to this conversation as well. So thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you all are. And thank you for being thought leaders in this, in our ecosystem. So thank you. And thanks to the audience for listening in. We will send out a recording of this program. And we also have the first and the second one we did it at the idea stage, the launch stage, and then this is growth stage. So we have kind of a 1, 2, 3 step conversation, though those are recorded as well. So again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.